Welcome everyone to Anthro-Lore, the catalogs and archives of myths, legends, and folklore. I'm Nalani, and I'm here with...
Buck. Hi, everybody. It's me again. I say me again, but you've never heard me before.
And I'm Alex. Hi, everyone.
So, today, this is the first episode. We recorded an episode before. We recorded two. They didn't go so well. We kind of lost one, and then looking back at the first one, we kind of want to redo it.
Yeah, they don't make sense without context, so...
I don't think they made sense with context, because it was sort of us taking a personal stance on a lot of undead pop culture figures and then rating them against each other.
And then somehow, vampire dinosaurs got in there. It was very confusing.
Okay, but that one's gone to time and no one will ever hear that.
This was beautiful. Should have been there, but...
You had to be there. It was like watching Chernobyl melt down. So, today, we're going to be discussing a few vampires from different cultures. And we're going to just be going over the basics of them. Not super in-depth stuff, but just to get an understanding of how different cultures have the same thing as other people, but in very different ways. So who wants to go first? Nobody?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do it. Because I have the weirdest one. So this is an old folklore story from the Aborigines of Australia, specifically the eastern and southern coasts. I don't know why just there. It's just what I saw. It's called the Yuramawahu, which is a very fun little name for this little guy. And I do say little guy because he's like 4 feet tall. And just a squat little completely red frogman. And you're probably thinking, that doesn't sound very much like a vampire. Well, it drinks blood. Not with teeth because it doesn't have any. It drinks blood using the suckers in its hands because it's got very frog-like proportions, very long arms, big head and mouth, sort of gaunt alien frog hands with the little suction cups on the end. But it doesn't go for the neck either. It sucks the blood out of the victim's arm, which kind of makes more sense.
Like a leech, in a way?
Kind of. I mean, it's definitely using the suction cups and everything.
Yeah.
Which is also just weird and makes me uncomfortable about frogs, because I don't know what those hands do. But, it's weird. After it drains the person's blood, and it doesn't hunt people, also. It's similar to the stories of the drop bear. It sits in trees, but not eucalyptus trees, only fig trees. It waits in fig trees and falls on its victim, drains their blood, and then once it's had its fill, leaving the person almost completely drained, it goes away, takes a nap, wakes up, has a drink of water, comes back to the almost dead person, swallows them whole. And then sometime later, it will regurgitate it. The person will be slightly shorter, like perceptively shorter, not just like they lost an inch or something. And then it'll drain them of blood again, and then swallow them whole again, and repeat the process until, upon regurgitating them a final time, it's just another Yahara Yowie.
So, their concept is to just, make more of them. They don't need blood to survive, kind of like...
They are feasting off of it. They gain sustenance from it. But it's just sort of completely different than how the Western vampire is, but it also has all these similarities. Mm-hmm. Sure, it's a frog, and also it eats people whole, but it's sort of that more monstrous vampire that the original Western myth was, this bloated sort of figure. Yeah. And also it fits into Australia great because it just falls from trees on things, because that's apparently the norm for Australian monsters. But, I don't know. Some of the rumors about it still has some local myths going around. Not common, obviously, because the Wikipedia page on it was 2 paragraphs, and the cryptid page had way more information, which is weird. But I don't know how to feel about it. It's a very interesting direction for a vampire. It's not a bat, and Australia definitely has giant bats. So it's a frog, but it unhinges its jaw like a snake, and it's not that nasty. Just avoid fig trees.
How many years has it been like a legend or like a myth? Like
That's where you get into the tricky part, because with the Aborigines of Australia, it's all oral traditions. So there's no timeline. It could be. I didn't find anything from it saying it is from the dream time, but it very well could be. Honestly, I'd have to ask somebody. I'd have to listen to this story and get more information than just what the internet has to offer, because it's just like the oral traditions are weird like that.
Which, to kind of go off of that, if anybody has these oral traditions and are part of your culture, we would love to hear about them, because a lot of this is based off of the internet and our interpretations with anthropology backgrounds. So we would like to hear your guys' input on these.
Yeah, and I'm also sorry because I probably pronounced that thing's name completely wrong. But I don't know. I want to hear more about this thing, because Australian mythos is really interesting, because most of the animals and monsters from their stories usually stemmed from an actual megafauna animal in Australia that the ancestors of the Aborigines encountered when they first arrived. Like the bunyip is a giant extinct crocodile, or the giant land iguana and stuff like that. So there's probably a real animal that was somewhat similar to this. These don't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
definitely.
I also thought it was funny that they actually have a way of making more. It's not just like a vampire bites you and you become a vampire. No, it's a really long process where you get eaten 6 times and then thrown up.
I wonder if that person could ever feel that, or if it's
They're not undead.
or are they on the breach of brink
They're-
of death, or
It wasn't really specific whether the person was dead or not when they came back, but it's implied they're not dead because the blood keeps returning and it keeps feasting on the blood through its hands. So the person still has to technically be alive in order for it to keep draining blood from it each time. Unless there's something inside of it that keeps the person alive. But it also doesn't fall into that category of vampires are undead. This is just a frog dude who drinks blood. It's not an undead monster. But it also didn't mention it was alive, so again, I'd have to hear the story firsthand from somebody.
yeah.
Because the internet's just oh yeah, well, I've heard about this. Oh, you've ever heard about this thing? There's some cute drawings of it, even though it's a 4-foot-tall frog man. All right, who's next?
Okay. Well, so I decided to use Greek's culture, their equivalent of a vampire, and they're called Phrygolikas, I believe. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
It's all ancient Greek to us, don't worry.
Yeah, and so basically they are the equivalent of a vampire, even though when you kind of get into how to break down the name and what it translates to, it really translates to wolf-like. And it's strange because when I was reading this, they kind of compared it a lot where the Phrygolica was actually a werewolf when it was living, and after he died, he came back but retained his fangs and hairy features and glowing eyes and things like that. But which was really weird because it was kind of at least in American culture, you see the wolves and vampires are always constantly fighting or something like that. But yeah, so to become a Phrygolica, you don't get bitten. It's not usually that transaction of blood and things like that. They're really more of a plague and a disease on their society. So if you see a Phrygolica, you're probably gonna die. To put it simply, usually either lived sacrilegiously, they were excommunicated, or they were buried in unconsecrated ground, and that's how you come back as one. And that belief that how you turned into one was from when the Greek Orthodox Church became huge during that time, which I can't remember what year. But there was that. And then also, if you were violently killed or something like that, you came back because you had a vengeance to settle with somebody.
Those are all like really oddly specific rules for a werewolf vampire.
Yeah.
Like,
So I think it depends on which stories you read, because there's a couple of them, but it was hard for me to interpret because I'm not familiar with the Vrkalica folklore. But some of them like did believe that you were part wolf or something like that, and then others believed that it was just like this whole other essence, but had a past with in the werewolves. There's actually one way that I read in one story was if you eat mutton that was tainted by another werewolf. So like if the mutton was wounded by one, or if it was already like being eaten or something like that, that would also turn you into a Vrkalica. Also, the way to like kill one is similar in the ways of killing your average vampire that you see in Western media today, which is like a stake through the heart. You either, I think it's like cutting them into like a bunch of pieces, and then cremation or exercising because they were seen to have poltergeist-like features and things like that. There's actually some folklore in Greece that you don't answer a door until the second knock, because if you answer the door before then, it might be a Vrkalica, and you die a couple of days later. I don't know how knocking systems work in ancient Greece. If you just knocked once and only Vrkalicas didn't know that you knocked twice or something like that. That was another thing to kind of steer away from the door and things like that.
that's. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of like the traditional vampire stuff, where we get a lot of the traditional vampire stories and like how they work from that. But at the same time, it's also like all of the werewolf stuff too. You know, like eating something that a wolf has eaten gets you werewolf or lycanthropy. And do they drink blood?
So that was really hard for me to figure out, because one thing, like it was like one sentence long with like, they're like vampires in the same way that they like to drink blood. But I read that the way they killed their victims was by sitting on them and like basically like suffocating them, which was weird. And this is all just reading things that were dissected from reading other folklore, but definitely when you read the stories, they sound so much more different than anything else. There's this one, and I cannot pronounce her name for the life of me, but there was a village, and the ruler's like daughters died, and she came back and was like hanging out with one of the guests like every night, and the family like wanted to see their daughter again, and so they like go in when she's hanging out with this guy and everything. She's like, you ruined this, blah blah blah, and like just returns back to like her dead and decaying body look, because they interrupted how she like had a couple of days to return to Earth, and they ruined that for her. Which for some reason, like I didn't see how like the Vrkalica, at least characteristics that I read, tied in with that, but that was considered like one of their myths. And I'm sure if somebody like actually knew the story and could tell me more, that might make more sense. But it was like a paragraph and a half long story that really didn't have a whole lot to it. But they are very strange, and definitely like they might change like person to person.
It sounds like it. I mean, it almost sounds like an umbrella term for an undead thing, but also maybe a werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
Like a mythical creature, like an umbrella underneath that. But, so like, what do they look like? Is there like any telling tales?
So, they do. So like when they come back, there was a quote by this guy. I'll see if I can find it. But basically, like when they come back, they're not decaying, so they don't look like they've been dead at all. They kind of like swell to like their actual features, but they'll have like a reddish tint to them, like they were full of blood again, and they were like living human beings. So there really wasn't like
You couldn't tell.
you couldn't tell. Yeah, it's like you either knew or you didn't, and you probably knew because it was somebody close to you who has died, and you're like, oh, they're supposed to be dead. Why are they walking around? And I think that's kind of like interesting, even like with reading a lot of like other vampire like myths and everything for different places, is that vampires like always just want to attack the people they're related to. It's never anybody else.
They always got a grudge with family. I mean, who can blame them?
Yeah, seriously.
Oh, and one little side note too, if you were red haired and had gray eyes during this time, you were considered a Vrykalica. So.
Wow.
Rip.
But who had gray eyes? I have never heard of someone having gray eyes. Unless
It's a thing.
I thought it was like a blindness thing.
No.
Oh. Huh.
It's like blue. It's just it's a lighter
Oh,
color.
that like the hazy. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I don't have color theory.
All right. Anything more to add?
No, not without confusing everybody more than they already
I mean,
are.
we're all already confused.
All right. Well, I did mine on a Chinese vampire, which is known as the Jinxing. Sorry if I mispronounced that wrong. Its literal meaning is like hard or stiff corpse, and it's known for its other name is the hopping vampire, and it's just because of rigor mortis has set in, and so it can't move its legs, and so it's just literally hopping after you.
I always wondered why they did that, and now that makes way more sense.
Yeah. They're known for like having their arms always outstretched with long fingernails. And these big, like a big mouth with like lots of teeth. And they're just known for having red eyes that glare at you, and they're kind of a vampire. They're more of like a zombie actually. It wasn't until like Western influence where they actually started drinking blood. And yeah, they come about because of like improper burial, magic rituals, suicide, and possession. And I mean, yeah, they're technically what we would consider. I mean,
Like just like a vamp,
yeah,
kind of a vampire.
yeah, kind of a vampire.
Do they follow the similar like sort of Western rules of like sunlight and that sort of thing?
Yes, actually. So they don't go out in the sun because it leads to decay faster, and so they like to hunt at night. You can have, if you have a mirror, it actually repels them, so that's where we get the mirror for Western. And cherry blossom wood repels them, and that's how you kill them. And usually what I've read is that when they first come out, it depends on how long they've actually been in the ground, but if they've just come out, they look just like humans, and they actually, if they were married before, they would go to their wife, and they would sleep with their wife and impregnate her. And the kid would be both dead and alive. It'd be like undead.
So could they still grow, or is it just like...
Yeah, so the kid would grow, and they would become, they weren't like the kid wouldn't be ostracized or anything. They would actually become like vampire hunters. They'd be like, yeah, you have magical powers, of both go and protect us.
That's kind of like a trope, isn't it? Like that son of a vampire becomes a vampire hunter. I mean, Alucard.
Mhm.
Well, Alucard's different. He just hates his dad. But that isn't. I mean, I feel like Van Helsing was half something.
Well, I also read that it was supposed to be explain why widows who are supposed to be celibate got pregnant. So
He was a vampire.
it was a vampire. So, but yeah, these vampires didn't really become popular until like the 1980s when horror movies really started coming out.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean that's kind of it about them.
So, like, do they just drink blood or do they eat people sort of more like a zombie would? Because if they had more teeth, I imagine drinking blood would be kind of hard.
In like because these guys come from the Qing dynasty, and back then they would actually eat the person.
Okay.
But now it's more like they just drink the blood because of Western influence.
Okay, but more classically, it's more of like that cannibalistic thing. Okay.
Yeah, and I forgot to add this when I went on the whole son of pregnancy, yada yada.
It happens.
They come if they've been in the ground for a long time and they come out decomposed. They like look more like blobbish and like blood sacks, and they tried to feed on as many people as possible because that's when they're at their weakest. And so the more blood they get, like they actually start to grow their bones back and they become more powerful.
Okay.
Interesting.
They also get white hair. I don't know if that has any significance.
Well, I mean, I guess they're kind of growing hair again.
Yeah.
But since they're dead, it'd be white.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if it has any relevance to anything like, in Chinese mythology where it has any significance. So.
It'd definitely require way more research because
Yeah.
it probably does have some significance we just don't know about. So whenever I've seen them, they have like the outfit with the spell tag in the front. I think
The
that's
talisman?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that comes from when it all started in the Qing dynasty. Like that's how they dressed.
Oh, that's like the burial garb.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, so they would have the talisman on. That was another way that you could defeat them.
By like removing the talisman, or
Putting the talisman on. It
Oh.
keeps them like under your control.
oh, okay. Because
Um,
I've never seen them without it.
well, there's a reason why. Yeah, and to stop them from like actually becoming the Jinjing, they would actually they would tie them tie the dead bodies like with their hands behind their back and their feet tied together, and then they would stick a bamboo pole up a certain place. so that when it would wake up and it would start bouncing, that it would just slowly impale itself before it could get to you. That was at least one of the things that I read, and
that
I was
seems like practical, but also very strange to like picture. Or
I mean,
ever
can you just
witness.
imagine kind of witnessing that? Like, could they speak? Because I can just imagine each hop. Ow, ow, oh God.
yeah, yeah. They would just tie it to them, and they would also parade like. When they're bringing it to the graveyard, they would have it like kind of out in the open, and like it was just like if you looked upon the ginseng, like you were gonna have bad luck, like you were gonna be the next target of the ginseng. It was
Okay.
just, like, you would die. But yeah, that's all I got on that.
So
That's
I have one question though, because I totally forgot about this, about the Raikalakas, is that sometimes they were thought to be like the devil, like reanimating the body, and not that actual like person that you used to know. So I was wondering, like, does that like do any of your guys' like vampire cultures kind of?
Mine, it's if the body's possessed, it'll come back as a ginseng.
See, I don't have any of that. Like, Liberty's, it was just a monster. Well, maybe not even a monster. It was just an animal. And it turned you into another one. And whether it was alive or dead remains completely unclear, because it sounds like it drains all the blood out of the person eventually. But also, it's just a dude that's a frog. And it's not considered what would be like in indigenous aboriginal stories. There's the Kwaiken, which are like the monsters from the Dreamtime, which I guess the best Western equivalent would be undead monsters or undying monsters, but it's not considered a Kwaiken. So your guess is as good as mine. If someone in Australia hears this story and I'm very wrong, please
Let us know.
email us. It'll be in the description of the video, or comment on the video, because that's the easiest way.
Very true.
So those are all of the cultural ones. Do we want to just? I mean, this is only like 25 minutes long. Do you guys want to jump into the pop culture? Or do you want to save that for next one?
I think we should stop this
And
then
save it.
and then do the other one.
Okay, yeah. 30 minutes is a good.
Yeah.
So,
Well, wait, can I do a quick outro kind of thing?
yeah.
So, just like after reading or hearing all about all of these cultures, I think it's like clear to see like where Western culture like came in and kind of added to stories that were thousands of years old, and it's interesting to see how they affected everything. So please do not take offense to any of this. We are open to corrections and everything like that. So feel free. Like, this is a discussion not between us, but between everyone and all of their beliefs and cultures and folklore and things that affect life.
Yeah.
That's a great disclaimer. We're also all students of anthropology here, basically, so we're really open to learning the actual stories instead of what we find online.
We want to learn the actual stories.
I want to know why the frogman is like this. I mean, I also want to know how to pronounce his name, and also how old this story is and where I can meet him, because he just... Well, no, I just want to know more about him. Because, honestly, I'd love to hear a radio play about this thing.
Which is what we want to do. So if we have any great writers out there.
Or anyone with a story that's not been told. Because if you have an encounter with one of these things, or your family has an ancient story, or your culture has a story that's not told as much, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to retell it for you guys. Give it a platform or something. Because the main goal is at least once a month we want to make a radio play of a story so we can retell it. It's not going to be the most serious thing, but it's our method of giving back.
Yes.
Reciprocity. That's an important word we learned. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to us in our... Yeah, just thank you for listening, and subscribe and follow Anthro-Lore.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Eventually subscribe to our Patreon. Give us money.
Oh my gosh.
Do it. We need money.